White House meeting was one thing, security assistance
And here
was
we
much
are.
more.
So this was the one I did this morning.
Military aid may be conditioned on Ukraine publicly announcing these two
I
investigations.
might quickly do the one that after, but
urgent text message to Ambassador
first,
Sondland asking, are we
I
now
wanna
saying
create
that
a
security
new
assistance and White
board.
House meeting are conditioned on investigations? And the response by Ambassador Sondland, call me.
and
Well, you know what that means, right?
sketch.
You get a text message that's putting it in black and white. Are we saying security assistance and the White House meeting are conditioned on investigations? Call me. In other words, don't put this in writing. Call me. Ambassador Taylor did in fact call Sondland.
And we have the
Informed
impeachment
by
stuff
notes
going on
he
here in
took
the
at the time of
background.
the call, he summarized
Just the
that
news.
conversation
I do like
as
at least that
follows.
they're giving us this live.
During that phone call, Ambassador Sondland told me that President Trump had told him
So
that he
here,
wants President Zelensky to state publicly that Ukraine
hopefully
will
everything
investigate
has stayed the
Burisma
same as it was
in
this
alleged
morning.
Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. Ambassador Sondland also told me that he now recognized that he had made a mistake by earlier telling Ukrainian officials that only
Alright.
a White House meeting with President Zelensky was dependent on a public announcement of the investigations. In fact, Ambassador Sondland said every
Bring it
date
down a little
was
lower than
dependent
that
on
even.
such an announcement, including security assistance. He said that President Trump wanted President Zelensky in a public box by making a public statement about ordering such investigations.
There. Now,
Ambassador
I'm
Taylor
going to bring it
testified
down
that his contemporaneous
smaller
notes of
and
the call
sketch.
reflect that Sondland used the phrase public box to describe President Trump's desire to ensure that the initiation of his desired investigations was announced publicly. A private commitment was not good enough. The State Department has Ambassador Taylor's extensive notes, and of course, we would like to show them to you to corroborate his testimony. But pursuant to the President's instructions, the State Department will not turn them over. You might recall from the tape yesterday, Ambassador Taylor said, they'll be shortly coming, I'm told. Well, somebody countermanded that instructions. Who do we think that was? But you should see them. If you have any question about what Sondland told Ambassador Taylor, if the President's counsel tries to create any confusion about what Sondland told Taylor about his conversation with the President, and look, Sondland
I
has one
spent today
recollection in
going
his
through comic
deposition,
books.
another recollection in the first hearing, and another recollection in
fun.
the declaration. You want to
Some
know
really old
exactly
stuff.
what
Actually, it
happened
was
in that conversation when it was fresh in Sondland's mind.
crazy.
And he told
Books
Taylor
I didn't
about it,
collect,
and
like
Taylor
things,
wrote it in his
like
notes.
Disney
You're
books.
gonna want Taylor's notes. In any
But it's
courtroom
awesome,
in America
like-
holding a fair trial, you would want to see
The art was
contemporaneous
amazing. The
notes.
history of it
This
was amazing.
Senate should be no different. Demand those notes. Demand to see the truth. We're not afraid of those notes.
I'm just quickly putting in
We haven't seen
the
them.
underlie of Heath here,
We haven't
obviously.
seen them.
I think it should be obvious.
Maybe those notes say something completely different. Maybe those notes say no quid pro quo. Maybe those notes say it's a perfect call. I'd like to see them. I'm willing to trust Ambassador Taylor's testimony and his recollection. I'd like to see them. I'd like to show them to you. They're yours for the asking. On September 25th, the Washington Post editorial board reported concerns that President Trump was withholding military assistance for Ukraine in a White House meeting in order to force President Zelensky to announce investigations of Vice President Biden and purported Ukrainian interference in the U.S. election. The Post editorial board wrote, "We're reliably told that the President has a second and more venal agenda. He is attempting to force Mr. Zelensky to intervene in the 2020 presidential election by launching an investigation of the leading Democratic candidate, Joe Biden. Mr. Trump is not just soliciting
Again, this is going to be
Ukraine's
just the
help for this
underlying sketch.
presidential campaign. He is using U.S. military
I hope the
aid
audio
the country
is coming
desperately
through
needs in
and
an
everything.
attempt to extort it." So that's September 25th. President on notice, scheme discovered.
All right.
September 5th. September 7th, The evidence shows President Trump has a call with Ambassador Sondland, where the president made the corrupt bargain for military aid in the White House meeting even more explicit. On September 7th, Ambassador Sondland spoke to President Trump on the telephone. After that conversation, Ambassador Sondland called Tim Morrison to update him on that conversation. Unlike Sondland, who testified that he never took notes, Morrison took notes of the conversation and recalled it during his public testimony. Let's listen.
Now, a few days later, on September 7th, you spoke again to Ambassador Sondland, who told you that he had just gotten off the phone with President Trump. Isn't that right?
I'm not sure how they can copyright news.
What did Ambassador Sondland tell you
I
that
don't know
President
exactly how
Trump
that
said
would
to
work.
him?
But I'm sure
If I
they
recall this
probably can.
conversation correctly, this was where
Maybe I'll get dinged for this
Ambassador Sondland
later, though.
related that there was
'Cause, I
no
mean, you can't
quid pro
copyright
quo,
something that's also
but President
happening live in
Zelensky
the
had
background.
to make the statement, and that he had to want to do it.
Not right away. Until it gets into
And-
their archives.
By that point,
Or
did you
however
understand
they
that the
work it.
statement related
Exactly, I
to
don't know the
the
ins and
Biden
outs.
2016 investigations?
I think I did, yes.
And that was essentially a condition for the security assistance to be released
And I
I
don't
understood that
think
that's what
I
Ambassador
like.
Sondland believed.
after speaking with President Trump.
That's what he represented.
Now you should bear in mind when Mr. Morrison says that's what he represented, that we asked Mr. Morrison about the president's calls with Ambassador Sondland, and he testified that every time he checked to see did Ambassador Sondland in fact talk with the president, when he said that he did, that yes, in fact, he talked with the president. Every time he checked, he was able to confirm it. Now, let's let this sink in for a minute. According to Mr. Morrison's testimony, former Republican staffer on the Armed Services Committee, he speaks with Sondland,
The problem
on
is I don't
September
have it
7th.
turned enough, I think.
and Sondland says he's just gotten off the phone with Trump. Okay, so this is contemporaneous. Just got off the phone. Call is fresh in everybody's mind.
So I'm gonna try
And
to turn it a
what
little
was
bit.
said? Morrison says
Because I didn't lay down the structure
Ambassador
first,
Sondland
see?
related there was no quid pro quo, but President Zelensky had to make the statement. And he had to
Sometimes
want to
that
do it.
happens.
No quid pro quo, but there's a quid pro quo. Now, there are notes that show this. There's a written record of this. There's a written record of what President Trump told Ambassador Sondland right after that call. Would you like to see that written record? It's called Mr. Morrison's Notes. It's right there for the asking. If these fine lawyers over here want to persuade you that call didn't happen or it wasn't said, or all he said was no quid pro quo, he never said, but you have to go to the mic and you have to want to do it. Well, there's a good way to find out what happened on that call because it's in writing. Is there any question why they're withholding this from Congress?
No.
Is there any question about that? They didn't claim, well, Mr. Morrison didn't claim absolute immunity, and Mr. Sondland didn't claim absolute immunity. There's no absolute immunity over these notes, no executive privilege over these notes. The notes have already been described, the conversation's already been released. There's no even plausible, arguable, invented even excuse for withholding these notes. Would you like to see them? I tell you, in any courtroom in America, you get to see them. It should be no different. Wouldn't be any different in a fair trial anywhere in America.
And again, I've fallen in a little too deep. Go back to the structure that I was working on.
Morrison again informed Ambassador Bolton of this September 7th conversation, and guess what Ambassador Bolton said? I think you can probably figure this out by now. Go talk to the lawyers. Go talk to the lawyers. And yet again, for the third time, Morrison went to talk to the lawyers about this
There,
conversation
that looks better.
with Ambassador Sondland. Morrison also called Ambassador Taylor to inform him about the conversation, and we have the testimony from Ambassador Taylor about their conversation, which is also based on his contemporaneous notes. Let's look at the conversation now between Mr. Morrison and Ambassador Taylor.
According to Mr. Morrison, President Trump told Ambassador Sondland he was not asking for a quid pro quo. But President Trump did insist that President Zelensky go to a microphone and say he is opening investigations of Biden and 2016 election interference, and that President Zelensky should want to do this himself.
Okay, so here we have two witnesses taking contemporaneous notes, both reflecting the same conversation. Conversation between Sondland and the president, in which the president says no quid pro quo, but quid pro quo. There are documents that prove this. Documents that prove this, that are yours for the asking. The following day, September 8th, Sondland texts Taylor and Volker to bring them up to speed on the conversations with President Trump and subsequently President Zelensky, whom he spoke to after President Trump. Guys, multiple conversations with Z, meaning Zelensky, POTUS, let's talk. Sondland spoke to Taylor, but not Volker shortly after this text. According to Ambassador Taylor, who testified again on his real-time notes, let's hear what he said.
The following day, on September 8th, Ambassador Sondland and I spoke on the phone. He confirmed that he had talked to President Trump, as I had suggested a week earlier, but that President Trump was adamant that President Zelensky himself had to clear things up and do it in public. President Trump said it was not a quid pro quo.
So it's all very consistent here. What the president said, no quid pro quo, but Zelensky must announce the investigations publicly, was what he was telling Sondland. No quid pro quo except for the quid pro quo. The president's attorneys rely on the first half of that sentence and would like you to forget the second half ever happened. But we don't have to leave our common sense at the door. We don't have to rely on an incomplete description of that call. We have instead the detailed notes of Mr. Morrison and Ambassador Taylor. But we also know what President Trump told Sondland because Sondland relayed that message to President Zelensky. During the same September 8th conversation with Taylor, Sondland described his conversation with President Zelensky.
Let's bring it up to
Here's
full screen.
Ambassador
You want to see it at
Taylor's
full
account.
screen? Would you rather it at full screen?
Ambassador Sondland also said that he had talked to President Zelensky and Mr. Yermak and had told them that although this was not a quid pro quo, if President Zelensky did
Give
not
you guys,
clear things up in public, we
some
would be at a
desktop
stalemate.
audio. Maybe.
I understood a stalemate to mean that Ukraine would not receive the much-needed military assistance. Ambassador Sondland said that this conversation concluded with President Zelensky agreeing to make a public statement in an interview on CNN.
I guess YouTube music.
So not only did Ambassador Sondland relate this conversation to Mr. Morrison, Mr. Taylor, not only did Ambassador Taylor, Mr. Morrison
We'll let
talk
that
about
go.
it, but Sondland confirms that he's relayed this conversation to Zelensky himself. Everyone was now in the loop on the military aid being withheld for the political investigations. Taylor continued recalling
I don't know
the
if that
startling
worked.
analogy
Maybe it
Ambassador
did. Maybe it didn't.
Sondland used to describe President Trump's approach to Ukraine.
During our meeting, during our call
Right
on
now.
September 8th, Ambassador Sondland tried to explain to me that President Trump is a businessman. When a businessman is about to sign a check to someone who owes him something, the businessman asks that person to pay up before signing the check. Sir Volker used the same language several days later while we were together at the Yalta European Strategy Conference. I argued to both that the explanation
Just
made
trying to
no
set up
sense.
here
Ukrainians did not owe
see
President Trump anything.
where this should be.
Ambassador Taylor testified that at the end of the
If I was
Sondland-Zelensky
going
conversation,
to
President Zelensky said that he had relented
try
and agreed
this.
to do a CNN interview to announce some investigations. So there was a breakthrough after all.
Well,
The
imagine that.
promised meeting wasn't enough. The withheld security assistance broke the logjam. Zelensky was going to go on CNN and announce the investigations. Taylor, though, remained concerned that even if
try
the
this.
Ukrainian leader did as President
I
Trump
don't know if it's
required,
gonna work.
President Trump might continue to withhold the vital U.S. security assistance in any event. Ambassador Taylor texted his concerns to Ambassador
might.
Volker and Sondland, stating, "The nightmare is they give the interview and don't get the security assistance. The Russians love it, and I quit." Now that's quite telling too. What's
Did I
Ambassador Taylor
hit?
worried about? He's worried Ukrainians are finally going to agree to do it.
Did I not hit
They're
live
going
yet?
to make the announcement,
No, I did
and they're
not.
still going to get stiffed on the air. At his deposition, Ambassador Taylor elaborated, the nightmare is the scenario where President Zelensky goes out in public, makes an announcement that he's going to investigate Burisma and the interference in the 2016 election. Maybe, among other things, he might put that in some series of investigations, but the nightmare was he
I'm
would
gonna
mention
try this.
those
I
two,
don't know how it's
take
gonna
all
work.
the heat from that,
But
get himself in big trouble
we'll see.
in this country.
I'm over on
Ukraine,
YouTube Live
this
doing
country,
this,
the United
so if you want to
States,
go to my
and
YouTube.
probably in this country as well, meaning both, I guess, and the security assistance would not be released. That was the nightmare. If it were to happen, Taylor's testified he would quit. Early in the morning,
Problem is,
New
I
York
have
was
this
September 9th, which was 12:47
right
a.m.
in front
Washington, D.C.
of my screen.
Ambassador Taylor reiterated
that was
his
the issue I
concerns
had
about
before.
the president's quid pro quo for security assistance in another series of
Oh,
text
well.
messages with ambassadors Volker and
Alright, we'll try
Sondland.
this. So first I had that.
So here are the September
Then I
9th
do
text
this.
messages. Taylor texts to Sondland. The message to the Ukrainians, parentheses, and Russians, we send with a decision on security assistance is key.
And that
With
is
whole
the
we've
impeachment
already
happening in the
shaded their
background here.
faithfulness. Thus, my nightmare scenario.
And I apologize
And
for
Taylor
that.
goes on and says, counting on you to be right about this interview, Gordon.
The news is the
Meaning,
only
if
thing
they do
seemingly
it,
that
darn well better come through with the military
live
aid. And
streams
Sondland
don't
says,
get
Bill, I never said I
dinged
was
for.
right. I said we are where we are and believe we have identified the best pathway forward. Let's
So
hope
there's
it
a lot
works.
of news. Although if you go over to my
And Taylor said, as I said on
the
the phone,
YouTube
I think
stream
it's
right now, it's
crazy
news
to withhold
and
security assistance for help with a political campaign. Ambassador Taylor testified about what he meant. He said that to withhold
YouTube
that
music.
assistance for no good reason other than help with a political campaign made no sense. It was counterproductive to all of what we've been trying to do. It was illogical. It could not be explained. It was crazy. In response to Ambassador Taylor's text message, Sondland replies at about 5 a.m. in Washington. So the message from Taylor goes out at 12:47 a.m. The message back from Sondland comes at 5 a.m. So it looks like it may be 5 hours later. So Taylor has texted at 12:47 a.m. As I said on the phone, I think it's crazy with whole
this is all
security
still the
systems
undersketch
political
layer.
campaign. There
I'm
he
gonna
is again, putting it in
go a
writing
little
for
deeper
crying
in
out
this
loud.
later. Not a whole
And
lot,
Sondland
but
said to call him about this stuff. And so 5 hours later, you get this really interesting message from Sondland. Bill, I believe you're incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear. No quid pro quos of any kind. The president is trying to evaluate whether Ukraine is truly going to adopt
again, I apologize for the
transparency
shit in the
reforms that
background
President Zelensky promised during his campaign. I suggest we stop the back and forth by text. In other words, can you please stop putting this in writing?
unless you happen to be
Congress
watching
may
it
read
yourself.
this one day. If you still have concerns, I recommend you give Lisa Canna or S a call to discuss them directly. Thanks. Now, as you can see, Ambassador Sondland's subsequent testimony revealed that this text and other denials of a quid pro quo were intentionally false and simply designed to provide a written record of a false explanation that could later be used to conceal wrongdoing. The text message says there were
Yeah,
no
no, the
quid pro
news is
quos
actually
of
great,
any kind.
and
But
it's
you've
funny that when
seen
I
this
was a kid, I actually
He
hated
swore under oath.
the idea of listening to the
He
news,
was
but
crystal
it's,
clear when
I
he
mean,
said there was a
it's like
quid
free
pro
information.
quo for the White House meeting, and he subsequently testified there was a quid pro quo for the security assistance as well, as confirmed by President Trump's direction to him on September 7th. Sondland's recollection of his conversation with President Trump, as I mentioned, has evolved over time. Initially, in his deposition, he testified that the conversation with the president occurred between Taylor's text of September 9th at 12:47 Washington time and his response at 5 a.m. He recalled very little of the conversation at that time other than his belief
Right now I'm
that his text
sketching
message
a little
reflected
lower down
President
here.
Trump's response.
Oh, there.
Subsequently, though,
Move that.
and again, this is one of the reasons why you do depositions.
I have to figure out how
in
to
closed
set this
session.
up right.
Subsequently, after the opening statements of the testimony of Ambassador Taylor and Mr. Morrison were released, which described in overlapping and painful detail Sondland's conversation with President Trump on September 7th, Ambassador Sondland submitted an addendum to his deposition.
This is the second live stream from
which
today
in
as well.
relevant part said this.
You can watch the one from earlier this
Finally,
morning.
as of this writing,
Also,
I
it's up
cannot
on my
specifically
YouTube right
recall
now.
if I had one or two calls, phone calls with President Trump in the September 6 to 9 timeframe. Despite repeated requests to the White House and the State Department, I have not been granted access to all of the phone records, and I would like to review those phone records along with any other notes and other documents that may exist to determine if I can provide a more complete testimony to assist Congress.
I'm just
However,
saying that
although I have no
the news is
specific
not always
recollection
what
of
people
phone
want
calls
to
during
listen
this period
to.
with
And I
Mr.
understand
Taylor,
that.
Ambassador Taylor, Mr. Morrison, I have no reason to
People
question
work all
the
day,
substance
people
of their recollection
deal with their own
about
stress.
my September
And
1
honestly,
conversation
news
with
is
Mr. Garrett.
often
During his
based in a
public
stressful
testimony, Ambassador
environment.
Sondland purported to remember more of
Hence
this
news.
conversation with President Trump. Although he still couldn't, or maintained he couldn't remember if it was on September 7th or September 9th. And according to his testimony, President Trump did not specifically say there was a quid pro quo, but when Sondland simply asked the president what he wanted from Ukraine, President Trump immediately brought up a quid pro quo. According to Sondland, President Trump said, I want nothing, I want no quid pro quo, I want Zelensky to do the right thing. And I said,
Who
what
says
does that mean? And he said, I want him to do what he ran on. In his subsequent testimony, Ambassador Sondland explained that President Trump's reference to what he ran on was a nod to rooting out corruption. Here, however, corruption like Burisma has become code for the investigations that President Trump has sought. So you've got Ambassador Sondland's emerging recollection. But what you've got is actually written notes taken at the time that he does not contest. Written notes of Ambassador Taylor and Mr. Morrison. Notes which I believe will reflect quite clearly the understanding of dirt for dollars that was confirmed by this telephone call with President Trump.
Alright, I should move up to another layer because I'm getting
Well, you weren't dissuaded then,
deeper
right?
in there.
You still thought
Let
that
me
the
go
aid was conditioned
lower
on
layer.
the public announcement of
If
the
you want to see it
investigations after
full
speaking to
screen
President Trump.
and nice, go
By
over
September 8th,
and
I was absolutely convinced it was.
click
And President
to
Trump did
my
not
YouTube.
dissuade you of that
Look,
in the conversation
concurrent
that you
viewer.
acknowledged you had with him.
I don't ever
Good stuff.
recall, because that would have
Balls.
changed my entire calculus. If President Trump had told me directly,
where is
I'm not.
That's not what I'm
We
asking,
are
Mr. I'm just saying,
here.
you still believed
Photoshop.
that the security assistance was conditioned on the investigation after you spoke
like I
to
said, I gotta
President
figure
Trump.
out a way to set
Yes
this
or
up
no?
better.
From a time frame standpoint, yes.
Okay, so here we have Sondland saying that whatever his recollection may be about that call, he was still very clear what the president wanted, and he was very clear there was a quid pro quo. That is consistent, obviously, with what Mr. Morrison has had to say and Ambassador Taylor. In other words, he didn't believe President Trump's denial of a quid pro quo, and neither should you. Sondland's understanding was further confirmed by President Trump's own chief of staff.
Usually
On
I just
October-
stop over
October
here
17,
and
in a
say
press
I'm
briefing in the
live,
White House,
but I decided to
Mick
stick
Mulvaney
around for a
admitted
few
that
minutes
President
this
Trump
time.
withheld the essential military aid for
Let's see if I
Ukraine
can set up
as
the
leverage to
sketch
pressure
as well.
Ukraine to investigate the
While here.
conspiracy theory that Ukraine had interfered in
I
the
will finish the
2016
paint
election.
only over on YouTube though.
So, and those are the driving factors. Did he also mention to me in the past the corruption related to the DNC server? Absolutely, no question about that. But that's it. That's why we held up the money.
When pressed that he had just convinced of the very quid pro quo that President Trump had been denying, Mulvaney doubled down. Let's listen to that.
But to be clear, what you just described is a quid pro quo. It is funding will not flow unless the investigation into the Democratic server happened as well.
We do that all the time with foreign policy.
This evidence
I don't even know that he needs to say anything
demonstrates that
after those
President
things.
Trump withheld the security assistance in the White House meeting with President Zelensky until Ukraine made a public statement announcing the two investigations targeted to help his political re-election efforts. But as you will learn next, he got caught, and the cover-up ensued.
My wife is messaging me. She's at work still.
Chief
I miss
Justice
her
and
dearly.
Senators, thank you for your
Again,
patience. This is a lot
Usually
of
she's home in the
information,
evenings.
but you have a very important
I am getting a little
obligation,
more Trump
and
news,
that is
however,
ultimately to decide
and impeachment
whether
news.
the president committed impeachable offenses. And in order to make
I don't know if that's
that
good, though.
judgment, you have
And
to
we're
have
going
all
to
of the
pull up to
facts.
the next layer.
And so we're going through this chronology. We're close to being done. But it's important to know that while all of this material was going on, these deals were being made, there were other forces at work. Even before the president's freeze on U.S. military assistance to Ukraine became public on August 28th, members of both houses of Congress began to express concern. On August 9th, the Democratic leadership of the House and Senate Appropriations Committee wrote to the OMB and the White House warning that a hold on assistance might constitute an illegal impoundment of funds. They urged the Trump administration to follow the law and obligate the funding.
I'm just gonna put
When the
this down
news
as a track.
of the frozen aid broke on August 28th, congressional scrutiny of President Trump's decision increased. On September 3rd, a group of senators, both Republicans and Democrats, including Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Senator Rob Portman, Senator Dick Durbin, Senator Ron Johnson, Senator Richard Blumenthal, sent a letter to acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, expressing, and I quote, deep concerns that the administration is considering not obligating the
Now
Ukraine
laying in a
security
back
initiative
layer.
funds for 2019.
Before
2 days
putting
later,
my
as
white
has
layer on.
been mentioned,
Alright, and I'm
on
gonna leave and just go back over to
September 5th,
YouTube now.
a Washington
Because
Post
I see that this is
editorial
shaking a lot,
expressed
and that
concern
would drive me
that President Trump
crazy.
was
But-
withholding military assistance to Ukraine in order
Um,
to pressure President
Let me know if you would watch
Zelensky
videos
to
like this
announce
over
his
here on Instagram,
investigations.
though.
That was the first public report linking
Back to
the
the
frozen
people on
security
YouTube.
aid to the investigations that Mr.
Dun, dun,
Giuliani
dun,
had
dun.
been publicly
Quack.
present for, and that President Trump, as we've heard, had privately urged President Zelensky to conduct on the July 25th call. That same day, Senators
Okay.
Murphy and Johnson met with President Zelensky in Kiev. Ambassador Taylor went with
Zooming
them,
in to look at this,
and he
I'm not
testified.
absolutely
Mr. Taylor
loving
testified that President
the
Zelensky's
overall look.
quote, first question to
So
the
again-
senators was about withheld security assistance. Ambassador Taylor testified that both senators, quote,
I'm gonna take this down a
stressed
bit.
that bipartisan support for Ukraine and
Until I get
Washington
it right.
was Ukraine's most important strategic asset, and that President Zelensky should not jeopardize that bipartisan support by getting drawn into U.S. domestic
Let's go
politics.
way up.
Now, Senator Johnson and Senator Murphy later submitted letters where they explained that they sought to reassure President Zelensky that there was bipartisan support in Congress for providing Ukraine with military assistance, and that they would continue to urge President Trump to lift the hold. Here is what they said in that letter. Senator Murphy said, Senator Johnson and I assured Zelensky that Congress wanted to continue this funding and would press Trump to release it immediately. And Senator Johnson in the letter said, I explained that I had tried to persuade the president to authorize me to announce the hold was released, but that I was unsuccessful. Now, as news of the president's hold on military assistance to Ukraine became public at the end of August, Congress, the press, the public started to pay more attention to President Trump's activities with Ukraine. This risked exposing the scheme that you've heard so much about today. By now, the White House had learned that the Inspector General of the intelligence community had found that a whistleblower
Goodness, this
complaint
is a lot of information.
related to the same Ukraine matter was, quote, credible and, quote, an urgent concern, and was therefore
I'm going to change the shape of the face just in this layer instead of redrawing
On
the whole thing
September
out again
9th,
and going in.
3 House investigating committees sent a letter to White House counsel
Because again, everything's a sketch, everything's fun. I don't want
stating that President Trump and Giuliani, quote, appear to have acted outside
Get
legitimate
bogged down
law
in.
enforcement and diplomatic channels to coerce the Ukrainian government into pursuing 2 politically motivated investigations under the guise of anti-corruption activity. The letter also said this: if the president is trying to pressure Ukraine into choosing between defending itself from a Russian aggression without U.S. assistance or leveraging its
Somebody over on
judicial
Instagram
system
said
to
that
serve the ends of the Trump campaign, this would represent a
was
staggering abuse of power. a
low-key
move to
interesting
Moscow,
listening to the news
and
in
a
the
betrayal
background.
of
And that's the
public
first
trust. The chairs
time somebody's
requested
commented on the
that
background
White
noise.
House preserve all relevant records
I'd
and
like to hear
produce them
more.
by September 16th. This included the transcript, or actually the call record, of the July 25th call between President Trump and President Zelensky. Now, based on witness testimony, it looks like the White House counsel's office circulated the committee's document request around the White House. Tim Morrison, a senior director at the National Security Council, remembered seeing a copy
I
of
don't
this
think I
letter.
have that
He also
far enough
recalled
down.
that the 3 committees' Ukraine investigation was discussed at a meeting of
So
senior
I'm
level
going to
NSC staff soon after
Do
it was
something a little bit
publicly
different
announced.
here.
Lieutenant Colonel Vindman recalled discussions
Where are
among
we?
the NSC staff members that the investigation, and here's a quote, might have the effect of releasing the hold on Ukraine military assistance because it would be, quote,
Okay.
potentially politically challenging.
1
for the
second, people.
administration
I will
to
be
justify
right
that
back.
hold to Congress. Prior to the IG
All
September
right,
9th
and I
letter
just
to the intelligence
brought
committees.
over the
Acting DNI
reference
McGuire
photo so I can look at
testified
the
that when he
colors
received
directly
the
for it.
whistleblower complaint from the Inspector General,
And
his office
also, I
contacted
still need
the
to
White House
switch a bit of
counsel's
how this
office for
chin
guidance.
looks.
Consistent with acting DNI McGuire's testimony,
I
the
don't
New
think
York
it looks
Times
bad, it's just
has
that it's
reported
not
that in late
finished
August,
right.
the president's current defense counsel, Mr. Cipollone, and NSC lawyer John Eisenberg personally briefed President Trump about the complaint's existence and told the president they believed the complaint could be withheld from Congress
There.
on executive privilege grounds. Now, on September 10th, the next day, Ambassador Bolton resigned from his position as National Security Advisor. On that same day, September 10th, Chairman Schiff of the House Intelligence Committee wrote a letter to the acting director demanding that he provide the complaint as the law
I'm gonna
required.
lay it in there just for the
The
shape
next
right
day,
now,
on
but
September 11th, President Trump lifted the hold on the security assistance to Ukraine. Now, numerous
I will
witnesses
likely
have
color
testified
over that.
that they weren't aware of any reason why the hold was lifted, just as there was no explanation for the hold being implemented. There was no additional review, no additional European contribution, nothing to justify the president's change in position except he got caught. Just as there is no official explanation for why the hold on Ukrainian assistance was implemented, numerous witnesses testified that they were not provided with any reason for why the hold was lifted on September 11th. For example, Jennifer Williams, who was the special advisor to Vice President Pence, testified that she was never given a reason for that decision. Neither was Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. Here's what he told us during the hearing.
Oh, that's probably
Are you
why.
also aware, however, that the security assistance
But he's
hold
been
was
getting
not
less
lifted
hungry
for another
lately,
10 days
which
after
I both hate
this meeting?
That's correct.
and hate
And am I
even more.
correct that you didn't learn the reason why the hold was lifted?
That's correct.
Hey, buddy.
Colonel Vindman, you didn't learn a reason why the hold was lifted either, is that right?
How's it going?
Colonel Vindman,
Let
are
me see
you
for a
aware that
second. I'm
the
gonna,
committee's launched an investigation
turn back on
into
this
Ukraine
music.
matters on September 9th, 2 days before the hold was lifted?
And
I am aware.
give you that
I
for
was
a
aware.
minute.
Ukraine.
All right.
This was a different
That's it.
explanation. than
I
what
will
we
continue
provided
the sketch
at the July 26th interagency meeting.
for a little
That
bit
referenced concerns about
more.
corruption.
I don't know how long I've been on here now.
Lieutenant
30
Colonel
minutes or so.
testified that none of the facts on the ground about Ukrainian efforts to combat corruption
Let me just
or
pull
the
this out of
country's
here.
contribution
Oh, I'm
to
sorry for how
Ukraine
loud
had
that might have
changed
been.
before President Trump lifted the hold. According to a press report,
Yeah.
after Congress began investigating President Trump's scheme, the White House counsel's office opened an internal investigation relating to the July 25th call. The following slides provide excerpts
Mac does
from a
not seem to want his
report in
food
the
anymore. He
Washington
only
Post.
wants to eat
As part of
Poe's
that
food.
internal investigation,
or Symphony's food.
White House
Anybody
lawyers
but his own.
reportedly gathered and reviewed hundreds of documents that reveal extensive
Kinda how Poe
efforts
feels.
to generate an after-the-fact
But he would also eat his own
justification
food.
for the hold on military assistance
Hey.
for Ukraine that had been ordered
Don't do
by
that.
the president.
That's Poe trying
These
to eat his
documents
food.
reportedly include,
Don't.
quote, early August email exchanges between Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and White House budget officials seeking to provide an explanation
I don't know if I said when I came on live or if I said before going live into the recording,
in mid-July on the
but
nearly $400
today
million
is the
in
anniversary of
security
Heath
assistance.
Ledger's
The Washington
demise,
Post article also
untimely.
reported that, and this is a quote, emails
I had the idea I
show
was going to do a
OMB
watercolor
director
sketch of him,
Vaught and OMB staffers arguing that withholding
but then
the
I
aid
started
was
thinking
legal,
about this
while
photo.
officials at the National
and I
Security
couldn't get it out
Council
of my
and
head.
State Department protested. OMB lawyers said that it was legal
Maybe
to
tomorrow
withhold
I'll
the
do
aid
the
as
watercolor
long as
because
they
I still have a
funded a temporary
decent
hold.
idea of it. I want it to
You should be
be
able to see these documents, but the White
the original
House has
promo
withheld
shot,
them
the first
from
promo shot
Congress.
we got of
So
him
the House can't
as
verify
Jay.
the news report, but you could.
Don't even think the makeup was
You
100%
could
right
do
in that
that
first
if you
promo
could
shot.
see these documents. You should subpoena them, and there's no reason not to see all the relevant documents. Now, the lengthy delay created by President Trump's hold prevented the Department of Defense from spending all congressionally appropriated funds by the
Funny
end
how
of
that
the fiscal
blumped out
year,
there for
as
hold.
we mentioned before. That meant the funds were going to expire
Alright.
on September 30th because, as we know, unused funds do not roll over to the next fiscal year. This confirmed the fears expressed by Cooper, Sandy, and others, concerns that were discussed within the relevant agencies in late July and throughout August. Ultimately,
I'm not loving how this
$35
brush is
million
working right now
of
for some
Ukraine
reason.
military
It seems to be
assistance
skipping.
and 14% of the DoD funds remained unspent by the end of the fiscal year.
Been a
in
day
order
or
to
so
make
since I
sure
turned the computer off.
that
Maybe that's the
Ukraine
reason.
did not permanently lose the $35 million of critical
Who knows? I should
military
probably check.
assistance that had been frozen
Actually,
by the
because
White
I've now
House.
put 21
Congress had
extra,
to pass a
or
provision
23 or
on
4
September 27th,
extra hours
3
of
days
video on
before
here
the
as
funds
well.
were to expire,
It has to go.
to ensure that the remaining $35 million could be sent to Ukraine. Now, George Kent is an anti-corruption and rule of law expert. He told us that American anti-corruption efforts prioritize building institutional capacity, support for the rule of law, not the pursuit of individual investigations, particularly of political rivals. Here's how he explained their approach.
U.S. efforts to counter corruption in Ukraine focus on building institutional capacity so that the Ukrainian government has the ability to go after corruption and effectively investigate, prosecute, and judge alleged criminal activities using appropriate institutional mechanisms. That is, to create and follow the rule of law. That means that if there are criminal nexuses for activity in the United States, U.S. law enforcement should pursue the case. If we think there's been a criminal act overseas that violates U.S. law, we have the institutional mechanisms to address that. It could be through the Justice Department and
So this
FBI
time I went and I
agents
put down the
assigned
dark
overseas,
first,
or
which
through treaty
is
mechanisms,
kind of the
such as
reversal of
Mutual
how I
Legal
usually,
Assistance Treaty.
well, how I have
As
been
a
doing
general
it
principle,
on here.
I do not believe the United States should ask other countries to engage in selective, politically associated investigations or prosecutions
That's cool.
against opponents of those in power, because such selective actions undermine
I don't know,
the rule
like
of
people
law,
say they miss
regardless
Heath, and
of
yeah,
what
sure I miss Heath, but I didn't
Now,
really know
David
Heath.
Holmes concurred
I
during
do
his
wish he'd
testimony.
gotten to portray more
Holmes
characters in his
also
life. I feel like we
the
lost a
official
lot of
approach
good
that
things
we believe in, that we
with him.
promulgate across the world, with what the president and Mr. Giuliani
I
actually
feel
were doing.
absolutely fucking awful for his family, and
So our longstanding policy is to encourage them to establish and build rule of law institutions
I mean,
that are
that gotta
capable
suck.
and that are independent and that can actually pursue credible allegations.
especially having it be
That's
so
our
public,
policy.
and so many
We've been doing
people
that for
just
quite some
treating it
time
as
with some
though
success. So
they
focusing
knew
on
him.
particular
I don't know.
cases, including particular cases where there is a interest in the president's, it's just not part of what we've done. It's hard to explain why.
Heath is amazing. I feel like
we
there's a
would do
lot
that.
of behind the scenes stuff we still didn't
Unfortunately,
get from this
we do know
film,
the
from other
explanation.
things. I know he
We
did
know why
that
President Trump wanted President
Black
Zelensky
Dog video.
to announce investigations because it would
Old
help
Black
him
Dog.
in his election.
And I don't think the
Now, on
video was ever
September 18th,
released.
approximately a
That's a
week
shame.
before he was supposed to meet with President
There are
Trump
like clips
at
of
the
it.
United Nations General
I
Assembly
think.
in New York. President
What I've
Zelensky
assumed
spoke
for
by
years
telephone
are that.
with Vice President Pence. During her deposition, Jennifer Williams testified, and she was Vice President Pence's assistant. She testified that Vice President Pence basically reiterated that the hold on aid
and
had
then
been
over
lifted,
on top of
and
that,
asked a bit more about how Zelensky's
go
efforts were
slightly
going.
lighter.
And following
Rush.
her deposition, and while preparing for her testimony at the open hearing on November 19th, Williams reviewed the documents. They've not been produced to us by the White House, And those documents refreshed her recollection of Vice President Pence's call with President Zelensky.
Okay.
And the White House blocked Williams from testifying about her refreshed recollections of the Vice President's call when she appeared at the open public hearing. They claimed that certain portions of the September 18th call, including the information that Williams wanted to tell us about, were classified. On November 26th, she submitted a classified addition to her hearing testimony, where she provided additional information about the Vice President's September 18th telephone call with President Zelensky. The Intelligence Committee provided this classified addition to the Judiciary Committee.
Hi, Mac.
It has been sent to the
Hey.
Senate for your review. Now, I've read that testimony. I'll just say that a cover-up is not a proper reason to classify a document. Vice President Pence has repeatedly said publicly that he has no
He just
objection
really seems
to
to
the
not
White
want
House
to know
releasing
who.
the actual transcript of his calls with President Zelensky, and yet his office has refused many requests by the committee to declassify Williams' addendum so the American people could also see the additional evidence about this call.
And there's
We
no
urge
quote
the
directly
senators
to try to
review
even.
it, and we ask again that the White House declassify it. As the House wrote in 2 separate letters, there is no
That's me
basis to
telling
keep
Poe
it
to go away.
classified. And again, in case the White House needs a
Oh.
reminder, it's improper to keep something classified just to avoid embarrassment or to conceal wrongdoing. Now, we've been through a lot of facts today. We've seen the president's scheme, a shakedown of Ukraine for his personal benefit, was, I believe, an obvious abuse of his power. But this misconduct, the scheme, became exposed. Congress asked questions. The press reported. Non-political officers in the government
That's funny.
expressed
When Poe
concern.
went after Max
The
food,
whistleblower
Max
laws
started eating
were
it.
activated. As this happened, there was an effort to create an after-the-fact misleading record to avoid responsibility
'Cause of
for
course he
what the
did.
president had actually been doing. These were not the only efforts to hide
Actually, you know what? I don't really
misconduct,
love that layer.
and the misconduct continued. Congressman Schiff will review some of those items.
Bring that back up and bring this hair in a little further. Now that I'm looking at it.
So we have about 20 minutes left in the presentation tonight. I'd like to now go through with you the president's efforts to hide this corrupt scheme,
Let's see how many minutes I
even
can
as it
give you guys
continued
today.
well into the fall of last year. On August 12th, a whistleblower in the
25
intelligence
minutes,
community submitted a complaint
9:30.
addressed to the congressional intelligence committees. This explosive document stated that President Trump had solicited foreign interference from Ukraine to assist in his
All right.
2020 reelection
That is
bid. The complaint
the
alleged a
thing.
scheme by President Trump to, quote, use the power of his office to solicit
we go.
interference from a foreign country in the 2020 U.S. election.
Much better.
The complaint stated that the president had applied
Now what
pressure
I
on
will do,
Ukraine to investigate one of
because
the
I did
president's
not
main
plan to
domestic
put down
political
any of
rivals
these dark
and
layers.
detailed the involvement of the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani.
I'm going to
The
minimize
complaint
that.
also stated that the whistleblower believed that the president's activities, quote, pose risk to U.S. national security and undermine the U.S.
Put up a
government's
new
efforts
top one.
to
Sorry,
deter
I
and
think
counter
I
foreign
might have hit the
interference
microphone
in
that
U.S.
time.
elections. Under the law, the whistleblower was required to file the complaint with the Inspector General of the intelligence community, which was then required to vet and assess the complaint and determine if it warranted reporting to the intelligence committees. The law gives the Inspector General 14 days to conduct an initial review and then inform the Director of National Intelligence about his findings. On August 26th, the Inspector General sent the whistleblower complaint and the Inspector General's preliminary determination to the Acting Director of National Intelligence. Inspector General wrote that based on his review of the complaint, its allegations constituted an urgent concern and appeared credible under the statute. The Inspector General confirmed that the whistleblower acted lawfully in bringing the complaint and credibly raised a legitimate concern that should be communicated to the intelligence committees of Congress.
And Poe
The
came
Director
back
of
in for
National
the attack, of
Intelligence
course, because that's what Poe does.
quickly informed the White House about the complaint. Under the law, the acting Director of National Intelligence was required to forward the complaint and the Inspector General's determination to the Congressional Intelligence Committees no later than 7 days after he received it. The legal requirement is extremely clear. Upon receipt of the transmittal from the ICIG, that is the Inspector General of the Intelligence Community, the Director shall, within 7 calendar days of such receipt, forward such transmittal to the Congressional Intelligence Committees together with any comments the Director considers appropriate. Yet, despite the clear letter of the law, the White House mobilized to keep the information in the whistleblower complaint from Congress, including by inviting the Department of Justice to render an opinion as to whether the complaint could be withheld from Congress. The statutory deadline of September 2nd, when the Director of National Intelligence was required to turn it over to Congress, came and went, and the complaint remained hidden from Congress. Finally, on September 9th, a full week after the complaint was required to be sent to Congress, and once again, an urgent concern, the Inspector General, 1 week after it was required to be sent to Congress, the Inspector General wrote to the leaders of the intelligence committees to inform them that the Director of National Intelligence was withholding a whistleblower complaint in direct contravention of past practice and the law. On September 24th, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi announced that the House of Representatives is moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry. The next day, the House of Representatives passed a resolution calling on the Trump administration to provide the whistleblower's complaint immediately to the Congressional Intelligence Committees. Later that day, the White House publicly released the summary of the July 25th call between President Trump and President Zelensky, and permitted the acting Director of National Intelligence to provide the whistleblower's complaint and related documents to the Congressional Intelligence Committees. The President himself was happy to discuss the motivations for the scheme in public. That day, in a joint press availability with President Zelensky at the United Nations General Assembly, President Trump reiterated that he wanted Ukraine to investigate the Bidens.
To do more on Joe Biden and the investigation?
No, I want him to do whatever he can. This was not his fault. He wasn't there. He's just been here recently. But whatever he can do in terms of corruption, because the corruption's massive. Now, when Biden's son walks away with millions of dollars from Ukraine and he knows nothing, and they're paying him millions of dollars, that's corruption.
Finally, the day after President Trump explained to the public that he wanted Ukraine to investigate former Vice President Biden, on the morning of September 26th, the Intelligence Committee publicly released declassified redactions of 2 documents, the whistleblower's August 12th complaint and the Inspector General's August 26th transmittal to the Acting Director of National Intelligence. Even after the impeachment inquiry into the Ukraine matter began, President Trump and his proxy, Rudy Giuliani, have continued to publicly urge President Zelensky to launch an investigation of Vice President Biden and alleged 2016 election interference by Ukraine. On September 30, during his remarks at the swearing-in of the new Labor Secretary, President Trump stated,
now, the new president of Ukraine ran on the basis of no corruption. That's how he got elected. And I believe that he really means it. But there was a lot of corruption having to do with the 2016 election against us. And we want to get to the bottom of it. And it's very important that we do. Thank you very much.
So here he is, this meeting at the United Nations, September 30, and he's still pursuing this bogus CrowdStrike conspiracy theory with the president of Ukraine. On October 2nd, in a public press availability, President Trump discussed the July 25th call with President Zelensky and stated the conversation was perfect, it couldn't have been nicer. He then linked his notion of corruption with the Biden investigation. On October 3rd, in remarks before he departed on Marine One, President Trump expressed his hope that Ukraine would investigate Vice President Biden and his son. President Trump actually escalated his rhetoric, urging not only Ukraine to investigate the Bidens, but China too.
Well, I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Bidens. It's a very simple answer. They should investigate the Bidens, because how does a company that's newly formed, and all these companies, if you look at, and by the way, likewise, China should start an investigation into the Bidens, because what happened in China is just about as bad as what happened with Ukraine. So I would say that President Zelensky, if it were me, I would recommend that they start an investigation into the Bidens.
The same day, President Trump tweeted that he has an absolute right to investigate corruption. That really means is he feels he has an absolute right to investigate or get foreign countries to investigate his political opponents. The president sent a similar tweet the next day, once again linking corruption with the Biden investigation. As president, I have an obligation to end corruption, even if that means requesting the help of a foreign country or countries. It is done all the time. This has nothing to do with politics or a political campaign against the Bidens. This does have to do with corruption. Give him credit for being so obvious. This has nothing to do with politics or a political campaign against the Bidens, but you gotta investigate the Bidens. I guess that's just a coincidence. President Trump continued to demonstrate his eagerness to solicit foreign assistance related to his personal interest. Here's what's okay. He said, if we feel there's corruption, like I feel there was in the 2016 campaign, there was tremendous corruption against me. If we feel there's corruption, we have a right to go to a foreign country. President Trump added that asking President Xi of China to investigate the Bidens is certainly something we can start thinking about. Even last month, the President and Giuliani's scheme continued. During the first week of December, Giuliani traveled to Budapest, Kyiv, and Vienna to meet with the former Ukrainian government officials as part of a continuing effort to dig up political dirt on Vice President Biden and advance the theory that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election. Asked about his interviews of foreign Ukrainian prosecutors, Giuliani told the New York Times that he was acting on behalf of his client, President Trump. Quote, like a good lawyer, I am gathering evidence to defend my client against the false charges being leveled against him. Indeed, evidence obtained by the House from Giuliani's associate confirms that he had been representing himself in as early as May 2019 as President Trump's personal lawyer, doing Donald J. Trump's personal bidding in his dealings with Ukraine. This letter, May 10th, 2019, from Giuliani to Zelensky, says, among other things,
paused for a second then.
However, I have a more specific request. In my capacity as personal counsel to President Trump and with his knowledge and consent, I request a meeting with you on this upcoming Monday, May 13th, or Tuesday, May 14th. I will need no more than a half an hour of your time, and I will be accompanied by my colleague, Victoria Tensing, a distinguished American attorney who is very familiar with this matter. Please have your office let me know what time or times are convenient for you, and Victoria and I will be there.
This is going to go back down to the bottom.
Evidence recently
See
obtained
what I got back here.
showing his effort to get that meeting in May with Zelensky. Giuliani told the Wall Street Journal that when he returned to New York from his most recent trip on December 7th, President Trump called him as his plane was still taxiing down the runway. What did you get? He said, President Trump asked. More than you can imagine, Giuliani replied. Giuliani claimed that he was putting his findings into a 20-page report that the president had asked him to brief the Attorney General and the Republicans in Congress. Shortly thereafter, on the same day, President Trump told reporters before departing on Marine One that he was aware of Giuliani's efforts in Ukraine and that Giuliani was going to report his purported findings to the Attorney General and Congress.
Well, I just know he came back from someplace and he's going to make a report, I think, to the Attorney General and to Congress. He says he has a lot of good information. I have not spoken to him about that information, but Rudy, as you know, has been one of the great crime fighters of the last 50 years. And he did get back from Europe just recently, and I know he has not told me what he's found.
I'm not
But I
sure
think
if I
he wants
want
to go
that.
before Congress and say, and also to the Attorney General and the Department of Justice,
bring it
I
down
hear
a
he's
little
found
bit.
plenty. Yeah.
3 days after that, those remarks, on December 10th, Giuliani confirmed to the Washington Post that President Trump had asked him to brief the Justice Department and Republican senators on his, quote, findings, unquote, from his trip to Ukraine. Giuliani stated, "He wants me to do it. I'm working on pulling it together and hope to have it done by the end of the week." That Friday, December 13th, Giuliani reportedly met with President Trump at the White House. And on December 17th, Giuliani confirmed to CNN that President Trump has been very supportive of his efforts to dig up
Don't know
dirt
if you can hear a
on Vice
cat
President
eating
Biden
there,
in
but,
Ukraine, and that they are
funny
on the
enough,
same page.
That's
The following
symphony.
day, on December 18, 2019, the House of Representatives approved the 2 articles of impeachment you are considering in this trial. Since the House voted on these articles, evidence has continued to come to light related to the president's corrupt scheme. Among other things, Freedom of Information Act lawsuits, press reporting, and documents provided to Congressman Rudy Giuliani, Associate Lev Parnas, further corroborate what we already know about the president's scheme. As Giuliani again said on December 17th,
You don't get to do that.
President
Just
Trump
get
has
that
been,
in.
quote, very supportive,
I
unquote,
took it away from her.
of his efforts to dig up dirt on Vice President Biden, and they are, quote, on the same page. Parnas further corroborated what we already know about President Trump's scheme, that he was responsible for withholding military aid and sustaining that hold, and that his personal attorney, Mr. Giuliani, was working at the direction of President Trump himself.
Okay.
On December 20th, new emails were released showing that 91 minutes after President Trump's call with Ukrainian President Zelensky, a top Office of Management and Budget aide asked the Department of Defense to hold off on sending military aid to Ukraine. So those were new documents that came on December 20th. On December 29th, revelations emerged from OMB Director and Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney's role about them.
This seems to be
about
all the
that role
stuff
in the
that
delay of aid,
they've been
and
trying
efforts
to
by
not
lawyers
get
at
out there.
OMB,
So
the
this
Department
last
of
20
Justice,
minutes
and the White
is
House to justify the delay and the alarm that the delay caused
the
within the
most
administration.
full
Those
portion of
records
this
just
so
became
far
available
today.
on December 29th. On January 2nd, newly unredacted Pentagon emails which raised serious concerns by Trump administration officials about the legality of the president's hold on aid became available. On January 6th, former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton announced that he would comply with a Senate subpoena compelling his testimony. His lawyers stated that he has new relevant information. On January 13th, reports emerged that the Russian government hacked Ukrainian gas company Burisma, almost certainly in an effort to find information about Vice President Joe Biden's son in order to weaponize that information against Mr. Biden and in favor of Mr. Trump, just as Russia did against Secretary Clinton in favor of then candidate Trump in 2016. That brings us up to January 13th of this year. Last week, House committees received new evidence from Lev Parnas that further demonstrates that the president was a central player in this scheme to pressure Ukraine for his political gain.
Bring that down just a little bit.
And also last week, the Government Accountability Office found that President Trump violated the law.
A lot of people probably
when he
just
withheld
come in
that
to
aid.
watch these, and if they do watch them, they skip right through. Just like
Last night,
second. And that's cool.
we had
I
further
do the
developments.
same thing with some
when more
our
redacted
videos.
emails
I
in
mean,
the
it's
Office of
boring to
Management
just
and Budget
always
were
sit and watch
reduced.
somebody draw for hours. But if you are going to just skip in and say,
I
hey,
think Representative Crowe
hit like,
showed you these.
subscribe maybe,
These
doesn't
are
do a
among
whole
the
lot,
documents that were just released.
or take a whole lot.
I'm sure
But it
that
means
if
a
we
lot
could
to me.
read under those redactions, it would be a very perfect email. But you have to ask, what is being redacted here? What is so important to keep confidential during the course of an impeachment inquiry? As you can see, right up until
And right
last
now I'm
night,
just going to finish up some of
evidence
the...
continues to be produced. The truth is going to come out. Indeed, the truth has already come out. But more and more of it will. More emails are going to come out. More witnesses are going to come forward. They're going to have more relevant information to share. And the only question is, do you want to hear it now? You want to know the full truth now? You want to know just who was in the loop? Sounds like everyone was in the loop. You want to know how broad this scheme was?
All right.
We have the evidence to prove that President Trump ordered the aid withheld.
I think I'm liking
He did
this.
so to coerce Ukraine to help his
So I'm
re-election
going to
campaign.
quickly do a...
He withheld a White House
Hue
meeting to
saturation
coerce
layer.
the same sham investigations. We can and will prove President Trump guilty of this conduct and of obstructing the investigation into his misconduct. But you and the American people should know who else was involved in
Aaron
this.
was working so late that the lights went off.
You
at
should
work.
want the whole truth to come out. You should want to know about every player in this sordid business. It isn't within your power to do so. And I would urge you,
And that's Mac again. No, that's not
even
Mac.
if you're prepared to vote to convict and impeach and remove this
Mac is right
president,
here.
to find out the
That's
full
Poe
truth
being a
about how far
psychopath.
this corruption goes. Because I think the public has a right to know. Now, yesterday we made the case for why you should hear this additional evidence and testimony. This morning I introduced you to the broad sweep of the president's conduct.
I'm going to
And then during the course of today, we walked you through a factual chronology
bring this down.
in real time about how this plot unfolded. And during that factual chronology today, you saw that in March of this year, Giuliani began that smear campaign against Ambassador Yovanovitch in order to get her fired by President Trump. Something he would later admit was necessary to get her out of the way because she was going to be in the way of these two investigations. This is the supposed anti-corruption effort by the president to get rid of a woman who has dedicated her career to representing the United States, often in dangerous parts of the world, to fighting corruption and to promoting the rule of law. This plot begins with getting her out of the way, with the president saying that she's going to go through some things. This anti-corruption reformer, this U.S. patriot, this plot begins with getting her out of the way. And tellingly,
I didn't sketch in the detail
and
on
this
that
says so
other ear.
much about the administration,
I'm
tellingly
noticing
it
that right
wasn't
now.
enough just to recall her or fire her. The president could have done that any time. No, they wanted to destroy her because she had the audacity to stand in their way. So we heard in March about the effort to get rid of her, and it succeeded. And guess what message that sent to the Ukrainians? About the power the president's lawyer has. The Ukrainians were watching this whole saga. They were hearing his interviews. They were seeing the smears that he was putting out. And this attorney for the president, working hand in hand with these corrupt Ukrainians,
was able to get a U ambassador yanked out of her job. Proof positive. You want a window to this president, you want entree to this president, you want to make things happen with this president, you go through his lawyer. Never mind the State Department, never mind the National Security Council, never mind the Defense Department, you go through his lawyer.
There we go. I think that'll do it
That's
for now.
March.
And
April, Zelensky has this huge victory in the presidential election. He gets a congratulatory call from the president. The president assigns Vice President Pence to go to the inauguration.
Jesus Jones.
May, Giuliani is rebuffed.
Bring it down
by
a lot
Zelensky.
lighter.
Cancels the trip to Ukraine, the one where he wanted to go, remember, meddle in the investigation. Because Giuliani says enemies of Trump surround Zelensky. Guess that means he didn't get the meeting and they must be enemies of the president. Of course, the Ukrainians know why he wants that meeting. May, Trump disinvites Pence to the inauguration. Pence is going, Giuliani's rebuffed, Pence ain't going. That's May. Instead, May 23rd, we have this meeting
Hey,
in
that's
the
my
White
cat.
House, and there's a new party in town, the Three Amigos. They're going to be handling the Ukraine portfolio. And they're told, work with Rudy. Work with Rudy. Ambassador Sondland, Ambassador Volker, Secretary Perry. Work with Rudy.
Okay.
And as you saw in June, Giuliani's pushing for these investigations. And they're trying to arrange these meetings and trying to make this happen. And also in June, the Defense Department announces they're going to release the military aid. The president reads about this.
The noise will
And then
get
he
rid of a
stops
lot
it.
of the
He stops the aid.
sharp
In
edges on
July-
this after.
On July 10th, you heard in the chronology, there's that meeting at the White House. The meeting in which Sondland blurts out in this meeting between Ukrainians and Americans, hey, they've got a deal. They're trying to get this meeting, and there's a debate about whether the meeting's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And Sondland says, hey, we've got a deal with Mulvaney here. We're going to get this meeting, and you're going to do those investigations. And Bolton stiffens and abruptly ends the meeting. That was the first meeting that day, and then Sondland brings the delegation to a different part of the White House, and they have the follow-up meeting where he makes it even more explicit. This drug deal is made even more explicit. And Dr. Hill is told by Ambassador Bolton, you need to go talk to the lawyers. I don't want any part of this drug deal they're cooking up. That's July. July is the month where that email goes from Sondland to Pompeo and others,
All right,
and everybody is in the loop. July is the month where the hold is implemented with no explanation. July is the month where Mueller testifies about Russia's systemic interference in our affairs. July is the month after Mueller testifies that the president believes he has escaped accountability. The next
I
day
feel
in
like I
July
do
is,
owe a
course,
lot
the
of the
July
last
24th
10 years
call,
of my life as well to Heath, kind of.
in which the
So I
president
mean, if I'm
asks
being
for his
straight about
favor.
it,
And July is the month. July
obviously I've
26th
cosplayed
is
him for a long
the date
time,
of
but
the call between President
in
Trump
doing
and
so,
Ambassador Sondland.
it has really,
You know the one.
I'll say
Zelensky loves your
it
ass.
changed me, but
He'll
I
do anything
changed
you want.
because of it.
Is he going to do the
if that makes
investigation?
any
Yeah, he's going
sense.
to do the investigation. July is the month of that conversation between Sondland and David Holmes, where Holmes says, "Can you tell me candidly here what the president thinks of Ukraine?"
It's hard to say.
Does
If
he
you've
give
known
a
me
blank
for
about
a lot of years, you probably
Nobody doesn't
understand
give
what
a
I'm
blank
talking
about
about.
Ukraine, he only cares about the
If
big
you
stuff.
just come onto the channel lately, you probably have no
there's
idea.
Not a big stuff here in Ukraine, like a war with the Russians. No. Big stuff that affects him personally, like the Biden investigation that Giuliani wants. That's the month of July. August.
But yeah, so I
we
felt
have
like I
that
kind of
meeting
had to do a
between
picture.
Giuliani and Yermak in Madrid.
I haven't done one in a long while, so I'm
August, we
actually
have the back
digitally.
and forth about the statement.
I've done sketches.
No, you go first.
But
And you commit and publicly announce investigations, and
No,
then we'll give you the
peace.
date. No, you go first. You give us the date, and then we'll announce the investigations. Well, we'll give you a statement that doesn't mention the specifics. No, you give us a statement that mentions the investigations. That's the month of August. August is also the month where it becomes clear that it's not just the meeting anymore. It's everything. Everything is conditioned on these investigations. The relationship, the money, the meeting.
And now I'm just adding in the highlights.
Sondland and Holmes testify. It's as simple as 2 + 2 = 4. That's August. September, Sondland says to Yermak, everything is conditioned on public announcements. So, message delivered, no ambiguity. The Ukrainians are told quid pro quo. Taylor texts, this is crazy, to withhold aid. September's the month, September 7th in particular, Trump and Sondland talk on the phone, and the president has a conversation where he says, no quid pro quo, except here's the quid pro quo. Zelensky's got
I've started doing a lot of web strips that I've been doing on here as well.
September's
And
also the month
I'm just
where
receiving
investigations begin
new ones from some of the other artists working on it with me, and
September's the month where after those
I
investigations
cannot wait
begin,
to start putting
after
them all
the
up.
president knows he's been caught,
Very
the aid
soon.
is finally released. And September is the month where Pence and Zelensky are on the phone,
Okay.
and Jennifer Williams
So that
has
layer does a lot.
classified information to share with you that I hope you will take a look at because it is relevant to these issues.
But I
That's
feel like
September.
there's more
October,
that I can do with it.
Trump admits,
Maybe.
yes, if it wasn't obvious enough, he wants Ukraine to investigate his political opponent. October is the month where he invites another nation, China, to investigate his opponent. This is the broad outline of the chronology that we went through today. Tomorrow, we will go through the law, the Constitution, and the facts as they apply to Article 1. That is the plan for tomorrow. We've
And now I
introduced the
will
case.
through.
We've gone through the chronology, and tomorrow we will
Save
apply
my
the
original
facts to the
sketch.
law as it pertains to the president's
Erase
abuse of power.
some of this.
And let me just conclude this evening by remarking again on what brought us here. What brought us here
Okay.
is that some courageous people came forward.
That works for right now.
Courageous people that risked their entire careers. And one of the things that's been so striking to me about that is I watch these witnesses like Maria
feel like
Ivanovich and Ambassador
something
Taylor,
is-
David
is-
Holmes and others, Dr. Hill,
I think I'm just reading too far into it. I think it looks fine.
is how much these dedicated officials were willing to risk their career,
And
the beginning of their career, or the middle of their career, or late in their career, when they had everything to lose. But people senior to them who have every advantage, who sit in positions of power, lack that same basic commitment, lack that same basic willingness to put their country first and expose wrongdoing. Why is it that Colonel Vindman, who worked for Fiona Hill, who worked for John Bolton and Dr. Cupperman, why is it that they were willing to stick their neck out and answer lawful subpoenas when their bosses wouldn't? I don't know that I can answer that question, but I just can tell you I have such admiration for the fact they did.
all right, I don't have my
I think,
phone.
and I think this is some form
Charger
of
up here
cosmic
to plug it
justice.
in.
This ambassador that was so ruthlessly smeared
I'll bring that up just a little
is
bit.
now a hero for her courage. There is justice in that. But what will really vindicate that leap of faith that she took is if we show the same courage.
I'll just zoom right in on it.
They risk everything. Their careers.
Lettering of it.
And yes, I know what you're asked to decide may risk yours too. But if they could show the courage, so can we. I yield back.
Pursuant to the provisions of Senate Resolution 243 of the 100th Congress, a single one-page classified document identified by the House managers for filing with the Secretary of the Senate that will be received on January 22nd, 2020, shall not be made part of the public record and shall not be printed, but shall be made available pursuant to the standing order from the 100th Congress. The Majority Leader is recognized.
Mr. Chief Justice, colleagues, we're almost through for the evening. We'll convene again at 1 o'clock tomorrow. Before we adjourn, I'd like to acknowledge that tomorrow is the official last day for this term of Senate pages. This group of...
There we go. That'll be the end of it. Thank you for watching. This will be finished up, like
in addition to witnessing
some of those
this,
other layers will be taken probably out.
Unusual event that we're all experiencing, they're studying for their final exams as well, and we wish them well as they head off back to boring normal high school.
Mr. Leader, let me just add my thanks and gratitude for all of us.
Right there's
it is
the layer.
rare, particularly these days, when 100 senators from both sides of the aisle, of every political persuasion, get up and give someone a standing ovation.
Okay, we've been watching the second day of the Senate impeachment trial of President Donald J. Trump.
Okay, so what I'd have to do is
Senator Chuck
erase
Schumer, the
those
minority
layers
leader, picking
only
up
on the
Majority
face.
Leader Mitch McConnell there
Like,
in celebrating the pages that had worked in the Senate during this term. A rare sign of unity over 2 days of what has been some serious and intense fighting. And we wrapped up the day, and if you've been counting, the Democrats and the Republicans will have 24 hours for their opening arguments over 3 days. This was the first day of those opening arguments. By our tally, they went around 7.5 to 8 hours, so there's still about 16 hours of testimony. We probably think they'll do 8 tomorrow and then 8 on Friday as well. And in his concluding his remarks, Schiff, who's the main impeachment prosecutor here, Adam Schiff from the House, he basically talked about what they're going to do tomorrow. He teed up tomorrow, and Sunny Hostin is joining me now, co-host of The View, also a former federal prosecutor. And Sunny, explain to our viewers what they're going to do tomorrow, because you said they're going to apply the letter to the facts.
oh, and I had to finish that here as well. But other than that, this will be up for digital download
Any good prosecutor would try a case. You
during
want to
February.
give all the facts
ASAP.
to your jury, and then you want to explain the law to your jury, and then in
Alright.
summation you
Dun,
are going to
dun,
apply
dun,
the facts to the law to the
dun.
facts, and that is what Adam Schiff said he is going to do. So I would suspect that tomorrow we are going to get
Quack.
a primer on constitutional law.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And of course, follow me for more live by hitting that bell. And you can join us on Patreon and get all kinds of behind the scenes stuff and so many free downloads. Oh, February is going to be nuts. Now we can say the end. Thank you.